Marcus Webb stood outside the grocery store holding canvas bags in both hands, mentally checking his list. Chicken, potatoes, green beans, vanilla ice cream for Sarah. He was 53, organized, predictable, a man whose biggest concerns involved tax brackets and quarterly reports. That's when he heard it, not a scream exactly, but something worse. The sound of a child trying to scream and being stopped mid-breath. Marcus turned. 20 feet away, near the parking lot's edge where cameras didn't reach, a man in a dark hoodie had his hand around a girl's wrist. She was maybe 15, blonde hair, eyes wide with the kind of panic that tells a man this isn't a father collecting a lost child. The man was pulling her toward a white van. Marcus dropped the grocery bags. The distance between him and that moment seemed to collapse into nothing. He didn't remember crossing it, just the feeling, sudden clarity separating before from after. The man looked up, surprised. Marcus grabbed his arm, the grip released. The girl stumbled backward, gasping. "Run!" Marcus said, voice steady despite adrenaline burning through him. "Run to the store. Find security." The man smiled. Not with humor, but with something worse. The smile of someone who'd faced consequences before and knew how to calculate them. Then he ran. Tires screeched. The white van disappeared into the deeper rows of the parking lot. "Would you subscribe for the next chapter?" The girl was still trembling, still gasping. Her name was Iris. She lived 2 blocks from Sarah. Her father was at a meeting, her mother at work. She'd come alone to buy supplies for a school project. Police arrived 12 minutes later. An officer took statements. Standard procedure. They'd file a report, check footage from neighboring businesses. But Marcus understood immediately that this wasn't the kind of crime that generated investigations. This was the kind that vanished into the machinery of bureaucracy, noted and then forgotten. Sarah was in the kitchen when he walked home, still in her soccer cleats, a habit that normally would have earned a lecture. He didn't mention Iris. He told himself he wouldn't need to. He was wrong. By evening, the story had spread through their entire neighborhood. By morning, local news had picked it up with that breathless urgency that marked minor tragedies before they were displaced by elections and weather warnings. By noon, Marcus had returned to his office and the world had moved on. But Iris's world had not moved on. Iris's world had stopped, reorganized and reformed around what had almost happened. The first sign came 3 days later. Marcus was leaving his office when he noticed the truck in the parking garage. Matte black, custom paint, chrome catching fluorescent lights like teeth. A man leaned against it. Tall, broad-shouldered, Hell's Angels patch visible on his cut. "Marcus Webb?" the man asked. Not a question. "Yes." "I'm Stone. Victor wants to talk to you." Marcus's rational mind calculated exits. Secure parking garage, witnesses above. But his instinct told him this wasn't a threat. It was a summons. The truck rode smooth as a boat. Stone didn't speak, just drove through the city toward the warehouse district, where industrial buildings sprawled like sleeping giants. They pulled into a lot surrounded by chain-link fence. Inside, Marcus saw them, rows of expensive motorcycles, all polished and waiting, men in patches and denim, dozens of them. "Stay here," Stone said. The door to the largest building opened. A man emerged, tall, early 60s, salt and pepper beard trimmed with military precision. His leather cut was aged, genuine. The way other men moved around him said everything. This was Victor. This was Iris's father. Victor approached the truck slowly. When he shook Marcus's hand, his grip was firm, calloused, the grip of a man who'd done hard labor most of his life. His eyes were blue-gray, the color of storm clouds, measuring. "I'm Viktor Sokolov," he said. "You saved my daughter's life." "I just—" Marcus began, but Viktor held up a hand. "You don't understand yet. The man in the van was Anton Kress, freelance enforcement. We've been watching him. He was coming for Iris, not random, planned, orchestrated." Viktor paused. "By Raymond Chase, real estate developer, very respected, very clean, except he isn't." The parking lot suddenly seemed smaller, less real. "Chase wanted leverage," Viktor continued. "He wanted partnership. I declined, so he decided to take what I love and use it as negotiation." Viktor's jaw tightened. "Now I need to understand what Chase wants badly enough to target my daughter, and I need someone who can help me find out." "I'm just an accountant," Marcus said. "Exactly," Viktor replied. "You understand systems. You see patterns. I need that." Viktor extended his hand again. "I need someone I can trust, someone who isn't part of my world but understands its value. Will you help?" Marcus thought about Sarah upstairs at home, about the garden he'd planted in spring, about the orderly life he'd built from the ground up after his divorce 15 years ago. He took the hand. "What do you need?" Marcus asked. "Your word that this stays with you," Viktor said, "and your skills. I need you to find the pattern. Follow Chase's money. See what police see, but don't report. You have legitimacy. I don't." They talked until midnight. Marcus learned about Viktor's organization, the rules, the honor code, the structure that sounded foreign but strangely familiar. It was the same code his father had carried as a Marine. By the time Stone drove him home, Marcus understood that he'd stepped across a line. There was no stepping back. He'd transformed from a man who pulled a girl from danger into a man entangled in something far larger. He was no longer ordinary, and ordinary was the only thing that could protect Sarah. Marcus spent that week building a map using databases his firm had access to, real estate records, property transfers, corporate filings, public records, his own analytical mind. By Friday, he had a picture. Chase had purchased 17 properties in 3 years. He'd developed exactly 2. The other 15 sat vacant, held in shell corporations, their titles shuffled through holding companies and trusts. On paper, standard development practice. But when Marcus mapped them, he saw what Viktor needed, a transportation corridor, a way to move things through the city without raising flags. Friday evening, Marcus drove back to the warehouse. This time, he didn't need Stone to collect him. He went on his own, taking the exit toward the industrial district, parking his sedan between customized Harleys. Viktor was waiting on the loading dock with 2 cups of coffee. "You found something," Viktor said. Not a question. Marcus opened his laptop and showed him the maps, the property transfers, the connections. He walked through the logic, how the properties connected, how they were positioned perfectly to move merchandise from the port through the city's infrastructure without triggering attention. Viktor listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Viktor leaned back and smiled. Not happy, but satisfied. The smile of a man who'd suspected something and now had confirmation. "Chase isn't just a developer," Viktor said. "He's building infrastructure." "For what?" Marcus asked. "That's what we're going to find out," Viktor said. "And Marcus, you've just made this personal. In 72 hours, Chase will realize someone is looking at his operations. He'll get defensive. He'll make moves." Viktor looked out toward the warehouse floor. "When that happens, we move carefully, because men like Chase have protection." Chase made his move exactly 72 hours later. It started small, subtle pressure on the city's permit office. A development proposal pending for 6 months suddenly got expedited review. A zoning variance that required community approval got fast-tracked. The signals were clear. Chase had connections, and he was using them to send a message. Marcus saw it first through the real estate databases, status updates that screamed to someone who understood systems. "He knows," Marcus told Victor over the phone, "or he suspects." They met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, anonymous. Victor arrived alone, which told Marcus something had shifted. "Chase has a meeting tomorrow," Victor said, sliding a folder across the table. "Noon, his office, top floor of the Meridian building." Inside were surveillance photographs. Chase sitting with 3 men, federal agents, ATF or DEA. Chase was scared. Scared men make mistakes. "You want me to get inside his office," Marcus said. "I want you to see what's there," Victor corrected. "Photograph files, records, anything that shows what Chase is actually doing. You'll have a key card. You're an accountant requesting a meeting about his property portfolio. Chase doesn't know who you are." "And if I get caught?" "You won't," Victor said, "because if it gets that far, Stone will walk you out." The simplicity of it was almost worse than the risk. The next morning, Marcus dressed in a suit. He carried a briefcase with his laptop. He parked in a public garage, paid cash. The Meridian building was glass and steel, all surfaces reflecting morning light. Marcus walked to the elevator bank and swiped the key card Victor had provided. Real enough. The elevator rose to the 47th floor, and Marcus felt his heartbeat accelerate with each passing floor. Chase's office suite was all glass walls and minimalist furniture. The reception area was empty. Marcus walked into the inner office. Chase kept meticulous files. They were organized in cabinets with labels, almost comically clear. Property development, tax records, personal. The cabinet labeled consulting fees made Marcus stop. Inside were invoices, dozens of them, from companies he'd never heard of, $50,000 to $300,000 per month. Marcus photographed each one. Then he found the folder on Chase's desk, Ares Development. Inside were architectural plans for something massive. Not residential, not commercial, a warehouse facility with multiple loading bays, underground infrastructure, climate control systems designed for specific temperature and humidity ranges. Marcus photographed everything. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Marcus spun. Chase was in the doorway. Behind him stood a federal agent, one of the men from the surveillance photographs. "Special Agent Hendricks, ATF," the agent said. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering." But the office door exploded inward. Stone filled the frame, and behind him came 3 other men in cuts. "Federal agents," Hendricks said, hand moving toward his waist. "Stand down." Stone stepped forward with absolute confidence. "This man is under our protection," he said, "and if you're ATF, you know exactly what that means. We own half the police in this city. Walk out now and this ends as a misunderstanding." It was a bluff. Marcus knew it was a bluff, but delivered with such certainty that Hendricks hesitated. That hesitation was all Stone needed. "Come on," Hendricks said to Chase. "We're done here." As they left, Chase turned back and looked at Marcus with rage and resignation. In that look, Marcus understood. They just escalated. Federal support wouldn't protect Chase from what was coming. 3 weeks passed in silence that precedes storms. Marcus returned to his job. Spreadsheets, tax returns. He picked Sarah up from soccer practice, helped with homework, made dinner she actually ate. But nothing was the same. Sarah knew something was different. She became quieter around him, more careful. On some level, she understood her father had stepped into a world she couldn't follow. Meanwhile, the city was changing beneath the surface. Victor called twice a week with updates disguised as metaphors. Territories shifted. Rival organizations suddenly found themselves disadvantaged. Police enforcement patterns changed. It was like watching someone play chess at a speed Marcus barely followed, each move creating cascading effects through the entire system. Chase disappeared from the Meridian building 3 days after the elevator incident. His office became empty. His staff dispersed. His consulting fees stopped flowing. For all practical purposes, Raymond Chase had been neutralized. But Victor wasn't satisfied. "He's gone underground," Victor explained at their weekly coffee shop meeting. "He's scared, and scared men in his position have one option: federal protection. He's going to sing. He's going to tell them everything." "Everything about what?" Marcus asked. "That's what I need you to find out," Victor said. "I need you to understand what Chase knows about our operations, what he's documented, what he can testify to." Victor slid another folder across the table. "This is Chase's apartment address. I need you to break in." Marcus didn't answer immediately. "I know what I'm asking," Victor continued. "But Marcus, if you don't do this, we're vulnerable. If Chase testifies about everything he knows, the indictment won't just target me. It will target everyone connected, including you." "I'm just an accountant," Marcus said. "You photographed files in Chase's office," Victor reminded him gently. "You trespassed. You obstructed a federal investigation. You're compromised. You're not separate from this anymore." That night, Marcus sat in Sarah's doorway while she slept. He was beginning to understand what he'd actually done that day in the parking lot. He hadn't saved just Iris. He'd enlisted himself in a war. Chase lived in a high-rise downtown, high security, keycard entry, cameras in hallways. But Victor had provided everything Marcus needed. Marcus went in at 2 in the morning, using the stairwell, climbed 13 flights, let himself into the sparse apartment. Chase had documentation everywhere, files on the kitchen table, video equipment connected to a central system in what had once been a living room. Marcus photographed everything, downloaded the contents of every hard drive onto an external drive that Victor had provided. But one piece of paper made Marcus stop. Handwritten notes in Chase's handwriting, names and details, locations and dates. And Marcus's name appeared repeatedly. Connection unclear. Accountant angle? Marcus photographed the note. Then he crumpled it and put it in his pocket. He was out of the apartment in 18 minutes. He drove the external drive to the warehouse and handed it to Victor without speaking. Victor opened the laptop and began scrolling. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed into something colder. "Chase was very thorough," Victor said. "He documented names, operations, locations. He has evidence of 12 federal crimes. More importantly, he has your name 17 times. "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. Victor didn't answer immediately. He walked to one of the warehouse windows, looking out at the city at night, the lights, the infrastructure, the human architecture that kept society functioning. "We do what we have to do," Victor finally said. "We make sure Chase never testifies." Marcus understood what that meant. He understood it in the spaces between the words. I didn't sign up for that, Marcus said quietly. Yes, Victor said, turning back. You did. You signed up when you crossed the parking lot. You signed up when you agreed to keep a promise. You're not innocent, Marcus. You stopped being innocent 3 weeks ago. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. 2 days after Marcus delivered the external drive, Chase had an accident. His car went off a bridge during a midnight drive. Police found him the next morning. Accidental death, they said. Drunk driving, probably. Marcus didn't ask for details. He understood that knowledge was a luxury he could no longer afford. But federal agents came to his house on a Saturday morning. Different agents, same institutional authority. They had photographs of Marcus entering Chase's apartment building. They had bank records showing deposits that couldn't be accounted for. They had questions that implied accusations. Marcus called a lawyer and said nothing without counsel present. The agents left, but not before making clear this wasn't finished. That night, Sarah found him sitting in the dark living room. "What's happening?" she asked. Her voice had lost its teenage hesitation. "I'm in trouble," Marcus said simply. "I got involved with people I shouldn't have. Now there are consequences." Sarah was quiet for a long time. "Because of Iris?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Because of that girl." His lawyer called with options: trial, plea, or testimony in exchange for immunity. The prosecution would argue Marcus was working with organized crime. The plea meant felony conviction. The testimony meant Victor went down. Marcus rejected the immunity offer. He instructed his lawyer to prepare for trial while maintaining absolute silence about Victor and the organization. What he didn't tell his lawyer was that conviction was bearable, prison was bearable. But testifying against Victor, breaking his promise, that was the thing that would kill him. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution laid out their case: security footage, forensic evidence, testimony from building staff. Marcus's lawyer argued the evidence was circumstantial, that no actual theft had occurred. The jury would have to accept Marcus had entered without permission. But the strength of the defense wasn't legal arguments. It was that no one actually wanted to testify to what Marcus had been looking for, or why. By week 4, something unexpected happened. A federal agent, not Hendricks, approached Marcus's lawyer during recess. His name was Sullivan, FBI. He explained, carefully and indirectly, that certain agencies had decided Marcus's conviction created more problems than it solved. "We're suggesting a deal," Sullivan said. "Plead to misdemeanor trespassing, 6 months in county jail, suspended. The felony charges are dropped." Marcus's lawyer asked why. Sullivan smiled. "Let's say that certain people understand pursuing this case to conclusion creates complications that serve no one's interests." Marcus took the deal. The courtroom proceedings took 1 day. Marcus stood before the judge and pleaded guilty to misdemeanor trespassing. 6 months suspended, 1 year probation, community service. It was the kind of sentence that pretended justice had been served while actually serving different interests entirely. Walking out of the courthouse, Marcus saw Victor across the street leaning against a truck. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. Then Victor nodded, and Marcus understood that the debt was being noted, counted, recorded somewhere in Victor's personal ledger of obligation. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He understood that the court case was closed, but the obligation remained open. He'd been given a gift: the dismissal of charges, preserved freedom, a future without prison cells. And gifts from organizations like Victor's always carried interest payments that would compound over time. Victor called 2 days later. "You're free," Victor said. "Congratulations." Thank you," Marcus replied. "Don't thank me yet," Victor said. "I told you I would collect on the debt. I'm collecting now." Marcus's chest tightened. "What do you need?" "I need you to help my daughter," Victor said simply. "She's 17. She's brilliant. She's terrified of her father. I need you to help her find a way to become something other than a casualty of the life I've chosen." Iris Sokolov lived in a house that looked like every other house in the gated community. Brick, colonial, manicured lawn, suburban success aesthetic. But inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Marcus arrived on Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, carrying textbooks and pretending not to notice the men outside the gate, the cameras on corners, the security measures that made the house more fortress than residence. Iris was sitting at a desk covered with unopened college catalogues. She looked different than she had in the parking lot, older, more guarded. When she saw Marcus, she understood immediately what was happening. "You're the man who pulled me from that van," she said. "Yes," Marcus confirmed, "and my father has been using you." "You work for him?" "No," Marcus said carefully. "I helped him once. That created an obligation. Now I'm fulfilling that by helping you." Iris leaned back in her chair. "I don't need help." "Yes, you do," Marcus replied, "because you're brilliant enough to know that the life your father built isn't a life worth inheriting. That knowledge is slowly killing you." Something shifted in her expression, an acknowledgement that Marcus had seen through her protective walls. "Tell me about college," Marcus said, gesturing to the unopened catalogues. "What schools interest you?" "None," Iris said flatly. "My father wants me to get education, to manage the organization's finances. He wants me to stay close. He wants me to become him." "So don't," Marcus said. "Go to a school far away. Pick a field that has nothing to do with your father's business. Build a life that's yours." "He would never allow that," Iris said. "Maybe not," Marcus acknowledged. "But I've talked to your father longer than you have. I've learned something about him. He makes hard choices, but they're choices he thinks serve the people he loves. If you showed him your happiness required distance, he might make the hardest choice of all, letting you go." Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus began to understand Iris in depth. She was genuinely brilliant, the kind of intellectual capacity that transcended age. She could discuss literature with graduate-level sophistication, understood calculus intuitively, possessed emotional intelligence that usually took decades to develop. But she was trapped. Every conversation with Victor was negotiation. Every friendship was monitored. Every attempt at independence was met with protection that suffocated rather than nurtured. Marcus suggested Georgetown. Iris rejected it. Marcus suggested UCLA, Columbia, international universities. Iris found reasons why each was impossible. It took Marcus 4 weeks to understand Iris wasn't rejecting schools. She was testing whether Marcus was willing to keep pushing, whether he actually cared, or whether this was just an obligation. She was testing whether he understood her. So Marcus stopped suggesting schools. Instead, he showed her what was possible. He took her to the library, the main branch downtown, where she'd never been. He showed her how to access resources, how to research, how to see the universe of knowledge beyond her controlled environment. He took her to a coffee shop filled with college students. He took her to a used bookstore and let her spend 3 hours selecting books about philosophy, psychology, literature, and science. On the 6th week, Iris asked, "Why are you doing this? My father paid you." "Your father asked me to help you understand there's a world beyond the one he built," Marcus replied. "This is that world." Something shifted. Iris began asking about Georgetown again. She began talking about majors, philosophy, international relations. She began allowing herself to imagine a future that wasn't predetermined. Marcus invited her to dinner with Sarah. The first time was awkward. Two girls, nearly the same age, shaped by vastly different worlds. But Sarah recognized something in Iris, some quality of intelligence and isolation that created unexpected connection. "My dad basically sacrificed his entire life for a promise he made," Sarah said unprompted at dinner. "He would tell you it was worth it, but I know it cost him everything. So when he tells you to build a different life, you should listen, because he's not telling you because it's easy. He's telling you because it's the only thing worth doing." Marcus watched his daughter speak, and something shifted in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. Sarah saw what he'd done. She understood the calculation, and somehow she decided the sacrifice was worth witnessing. By month 2, Iris had applied to Georgetown. By month 3, she'd been accepted. Early decision, full scholarship, departmental recognition for academic excellence. When she told Victor, he came to Marcus's house. They stood in the driveway, evening light catching the sides of Victor's face, making him look older than Marcus remembered. "She's leaving," Victor said simply. "Yes," Marcus replied. "That was the point." "I'm not angry," Victor said. "I'm just understanding now what you did. You gave her permission to leave me. You showed her that it was possible, that someone loved her enough to let her go." Victor paused. "The debt is paid. What you did for Iris settles everything between us. You're free. You're clear. You owe me nothing." Marcus felt something release inside him. Not relief exactly, but the knowledge that one chapter had concluded. 8 months later, Iris Sokolov started at Georgetown. Marcus helped her move into the dorms, driving with her, Sarah riding along, carrying boxes of books and clothes and the small items that transform a generic dorm room into a space that contains a person. He helped her set up her desk, install her bookshelf, hang the artwork she'd selected during those months of tutoring. When he was leaving, Iris hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting me give up, for showing me that I could become something else." "You became yourself," Marcus said. "That's all I did. I showed you the door." Sarah stayed longer. She and Iris exchanged numbers, promised to text, made plans for spring break visits. Marcus watched his daughter, 17 years old, almost an adult, embracing a girl she'd met only a handful of times, and he understood that something had shifted in his family. The guilt he'd been carrying had been partially transmuted into something else. The drive back to their home took 6 hours. Sarah slept for most of it, her head against the car window, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been in a long time. Marcus drove through the night, thinking about seasons, about how endings contain new beginnings, about how people can be transformed by decisions made in parking lots and carried through years of consequence. His job was waiting when he returned. Garrett called asking if Marcus was ready to come back from extended leave. Marcus said yes. He returned to his desk, his spreadsheets, his familiar role in the architecture of legitimate finance. but the world had changed him. His relationship to numbers was different now. He understood that spreadsheets represented human choices, that financial systems were built on foundations of promise and trust, that small decisions about honesty or compromise shaped entire lives. Sarah graduated from high school that June. She was accepted to UC Berkeley, far enough for independence, close enough for visits. She had decided to study mathematics, which made Marcus smile. His brilliant, isolated daughter was building her life around the one thing that had once been his escape from complexity. At her graduation party, family friends asked if Marcus was proud. He said yes, and meant it. But the pride was complicated by understanding that Sarah would never have had to grow up as quickly if he'd simply remained an ordinary accountant. "Would you do it again?" Sarah asked him one evening that summer, sitting on the porch watching the neighborhood move through its routines. "If you could go back to the parking lot, would you still pull that girl out of the van?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He felt the weight of the question. "Yes," he said finally, "I would, but I would try harder to understand the cost beforehand. I would prepare you better." "You can't," Sarah said quietly. "That's not how families work. When a parent makes a big choice, the kids live with it. That's just how it is." "I know," Marcus said. "But I wish I'd understood that before I made the choice." "Yeah," Sarah agreed. "Most parents probably wish that." They sat in comfortable silence, and Marcus understood that this was redemption, not the absence of consequences, but the presence of someone who chose to live with you anyway. By the first anniversary of the trial, Marcus could almost convince himself it had been a dream. He went to work, came home, had dinner with Sarah before she left for college, maintained his house and car and ordinary life. But on quiet nights, Marcus thought about the parking lot. He thought about the moment when mercy had transformed into obligation. He thought about the cost, not just legal consequences or trial, but the permanent reorganization of his psyche, the way that living with knowledge had altered who he was capable of being. And sometimes he wondered if he could go back to that afternoon. Would he pass by a girl being forced into a van? The answer was still yes, but it was a yes that contained sadness, complexity, and recognition that some choices rewrite the entire trajectory of a life. He ran into Stone at a grocery store 3 months after Iris left for college. Stone was buying vegetables, which somehow seemed both unexpected and completely logical. They nodded with recognition that exists between men who have been through something consequential, but agreed not to acknowledge it explicitly. "Iris is doing well," Stone said quietly while standing in the checkout line. "Victor gets emails from her about her classes. She's happy." "Good," Marcus replied. "He's proud of you," Stone continued, "for what you did for her, for choosing to prioritize her future instead of yourself." "Tell him I appreciate that," Marcus said. "But tell him I did it because I believe it was right, not because he asked me to." Stone smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had ever seen from him. "That's exactly what Victor said you'd say. He said that's why the choice mattered." By year 2, Marcus had begun to rebuild structure into his life. He continued his work. He maintained his relationships. He wrote occasionally, trying to process what had happened. But on quiet nights, he still thought about the parking lot, understanding that some choices, once made, rewrite the entire trajectory of a life. 3 years after the trial, Marcus received a letter from Georgetown. It was from Iris, written on university letterhead, her handwriting careful and deliberate. She'd graduated early, a year ahead of her class, completing a double major in literature and international relations with honours. She'd been accepted to a PhD program at Oxford, fully funded, with a research fellowship supporting her study of narratives of resistance in post-colonial literature. "I wanted you to know," she wrote, "that I'm building a life that makes your choices mean something. I'm not just getting a degree, I'm learning how to open doors for people whose futures seemed closed. I don't know if you understand the weight of what you did. You didn't just help a girl get into college. You showed me that I could reject the predetermined future. You showed me that sacrifice, real costly sacrifice, could be made in service of something beyond power. My father understands now what you were doing. He's been trying to remake the organization's structure. Less about enforcement, more about protection and sustainability. He's getting older. He's starting to think about what he'll leave behind, and he's realized that what matters most isn't territory or power. It's the people who remember you with gratitude instead of fear. That's because of you. That's because you showed him it was possible to be a different kind of man. I'm grateful, Marcus. Grateful in ways that words can't capture. With deep gratitude, Iris, Marcus sat in his home office and read the letter 3 times. On the 3rd reading, he cried. He called Sarah, who was at Berkeley studying mathematics. He read her sections of Iris's letter, and she listened without interrupting. "She's going to do good things," Sarah said when he finished, "because you helped her understand that was possible." "Maybe," Marcus said, "or maybe she would have found a way regardless." "Does it matter?" Sarah asked. "If the result is the same?" Marcus thought about that. In accounting, results were what mattered. Methodology was secondary, but in morality and choice, methodology was everything. It was the difference between righteousness and consequence. "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "Well," Sarah replied, "I think you made a difference. And I think someday I'll probably understand it better than I do right now. But I think on some level, I've already forgiven you." After they hung up, Marcus sat in darkness and tried to inventory the damage and the gains. He'd sacrificed career momentum. He'd pulled his daughter into complexity she shouldn't have navigated. He'd become entangled with organized crime and made choices in moral gray areas that never quite resolved into clarity. But Iris was safe. Iris was going to Oxford. Iris was going to spend her life opening doors for people. Sarah had learned something about sacrifice that would probably shape her entire life. And Marcus, for all his flaws and compromises, had understood that sometimes the cost of integrity is exactly its value. 5 years after Iris left for Oxford, she returned to the region. She was working for a non-profit providing educational opportunities in underserved communities. She'd been offered a position as director of a new initiative. She wanted Marcus on the advisory board. He said yes, immediately. At the first board meeting, Iris stood at the front of the room describing her vision, an organization providing mentorship, educational resources, and opportunity navigation for young people touched by organized crime, trafficking, abuse, or systemic poverty. She talked about teaching young people that their circumstances weren't destiny. She talked about opening doors that appeared permanently closed. "I'm doing this," she said, looking directly at Marcus, "because someone once showed me that the future I thought was predetermined wasn't actually predetermined. Someone made a sacrifice so that I could understand that." I want to spend my career doing that for other people." Marcus felt tears form again, that same capacity for emotional depth that had surprised him years ago. After the meeting, Iris hugged him. "I never would have asked you to make the choices you made," she said quietly, "but I'm grateful every day that you made them. And I wanted you to know that I'm building a life that makes those choices mean something." "You're doing more than that," Marcus replied. "You're transforming them. You're taking sacrifice and turning it into purpose. That's the only redemption that really matters." Marcus returned home and found Sarah waiting on his porch. She'd driven down from Berkeley, surprising him, wanting to be there when he got home. They sat together in darkness, watching the neighborhood move through its evening routines, and Marcus understood that this was what circles were: beginnings that looped back to themselves, endings that contained new beginnings. The way sacrifice on behalf of one person ripples outward to affect countless others. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Sarah said, "for what you did, for what you're still doing." "I'm proud of you too," Marcus replied, "for forgiving me, for choosing to understand." They sat in comfortable silence, and Marcus understood that this was redemption not as final state, but as ongoing practice. Not the absence of consequences, but the presence of meaning that grew larger with each choice to make the next right decision. The promise made in a parking lot had transformed into something larger, a commitment not just to one girl, but to a way of living, a way of understanding that honor survives in systems built on sacrifice, and meaning emerges from the willingness to pay costs that seem impossible. And in darkness, in the presence of his daughter, and the knowledge of young lives that would be changed by Iris's work, Marcus understood that the parking lot hadn't been the beginning. It had been the beginning of understanding that stories don't end when trials conclude. Stories continue quietly, in lives that have been touched, in choices that ripple outward, in circles that expand to contain more people who understand that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being willing to say yes to costs that appear unbearable. And that understanding was worth everything. Thank you for watching. Dad saved his daughter's friend from a kidnapper. She was the Hells Angels leader's daughter. Subscribe to never miss another story of sacrifice, honor, and the choices that define us. See you in the next chapter.